Testimony Tuesday with CJ Doyle. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of St. Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is CJ Doyle, Executive Director of the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts, founded in 1995. CatholicActionLeague.org is where you can find him. CJ Doyle, welcome to The Simple Truth. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me, Jim. I'm delighted to be able to participate in this wonderful radio apostolate that you have.
Well, it's a great blessing to have you with us. So we always start at the beginning on Testimony Tuesday. So what was your early life like, your family, the culture that you grew up in?
Well, I was very lucky. I grew up in a pious Catholic home in what was then an overwhelmingly Catholic city. Boston in the 1950s and 60s was about 72% Catholic. It had a very, very strong Catholic culture, a strong kind of corporate Catholic presence, a strong presence that permeated all aspects of certainly the city's political life and civic life. I grew up with my mother and my maternal grandparents. My grandmother was of Irish descent, but an immigrant from Carbonear in Newfoundland. My grandfather was an Irish immigrant. He came from Galway, from Loch Ray in County Galway. They were both very pious Catholics. My grandmother was a daily communicant. My grandfather was a member of the Holy Name Society and the Knights of Columbus. At 6:30 every evening, my grandparents would turn on the radio and WBOS and listen to Cardinal Cushing and participate as he recited the Most Holy Rosary. And he had a great, booming voice. You'd hear Cardinal Cushing, "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." And it recited throughout the house. My mother was also a very devout Catholic. She said the Rosary every day. And I was very lucky. I lived across the street from a public school, Ellis Mendel School, which was named after, by the way, a congregational minister. No separation of church and state there. So my mother could have easily sent me to this public school across the street from my home and watched me from the living room window go into the schoolroom. But instead, she chose to give me a Catholic education. And the nearest Catholic school was Holy Trinity Grammar School, about a mile away. So she had to drive me there every morning. And when I was very young, my grandparents would meet me and walk home with me. And it was Holy Trinity was run by a group of German Franciscan nuns, and they were a satellite facility of the famous, now closed, Holy Trinity Church on Sherman Avenue in Boston, which was the German parish in Boston, and which was the parish that brought the celebration of Christmas to Puritan New England, and was the parish associated with the foundation of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, a very famous parish. And the nuns taught us to memorize the Baltimore Catechism, and we learned about why were you created to know, love, and serve God in this life, and to be happy with Him in the next. So that was a good Catholic foundation. Also, we had a very kind of small, poor parish, St. Mary of the Angels in Roxbury, but I got recruited at an early age to be an altar boy, and that was 1962. Now, the Novus Ordo vernacular Mass came in 1970. There was a kind of a hybrid Latin-English Mass in 1966, and the first changes in the Mass were 64. So I actually became an altar boy and learned the old traditional Tridentine Latin Mass and the prayers at the foot of the altar and the Confiteor and the Suscipiat and everything else. So between my home and between my wonderful parochial school and the Baltimore Catechism, and between the traditional Latin Mass, I had a very, very good, strong Catholic foundation.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like it. That's terrific. So what happened next from there?
Well, the Archdiocese closed my parochial school when I was in the 7th grade. I went to St. Mary of the Assumption, Brookline, and then I went to the Irish Christian Brothers at Catholic Memorial High School in West Roxbury. I got a very good, very classical, rigorous education there at the time, and then I matriculated on to Boston College. And you could still, at that time, get a Catholic education at Boston College, but it was already the revolution had already washed over it. I'll never forget my first image, my first memory of Boston College. This would have been in I think September of 1971. Every classroom you went into, above the blackboard, you saw an outline in dust, and the outline in dust was of a cross. They had just taken down the crucifixes the summer before. Now they actually put them back up again about 2 years ago, but for 50 years there were no crucifixes in any classroom at Boston College. So looking at Boston College is famous for its architecture. Walter Muir Whitehill, the architectural historian, said BC had the best example of collegiate Gothic in North America. This Henrician Tudor Perpendicular Gothic. And I remember staring staring at it and said, this is what Elizabethan England must have looked like. This is all this beautiful Catholic architecture, but the faith had already had kind of drifted away. And there were still a few Jesuits, a few Orthodox Jesuits that were teaching there, and it hadn't become quite as as secularized and as liberalized today. Nowadays, in the last 30 years, they basically every commencement they give an award to some new pro-abortion political figure. It wasn't quite that bad when I was there, and it was still a very beautiful place. St. Mary's Chapel was an exquisitely beautiful chapel. The old Baptist Library was a place bathed in stone and stained glass and wrought iron railing and oaken furniture. And St. Ignatius Church, which was the parish church, was still a very beautiful church. So you were able to you could get a Catholic education at BC if you look for it. And when I graduated, I went to work for the legislature, and I went to work for the Massachusetts House of Representatives for a state representative named James J. Craven Jr. And he was the chairman of the Democratic Party in Boston. And I think if that shocks some of your listeners, you must understand that 40 years ago or more, the Democratic Party in Massachusetts was the pro-life party, the socially conservative party, and the Republican Party was the socially liberal party, the pro-abortion party. In 1978, we had a pro-abortion socially liberal Republican, Frank Hatch, running for governor against a pro-life Democrat, Edward J. King, who was a daily communicant. So the Democratic Party was the party that was opposed to abortion, opposed to birth control, opposed to the secularization. Now, those pro-life Democrats they were part of the World War II generation for the most part, and they're all gone now. And now the Democratic Party is completely since the revolution under George McGovern in 1972, it's now completely been essentially destroyed as any kind of a moderate party. And the Republican Party in Massachusetts is still basically socially liberal. Our last Republican governor was Charlie Baker, who was a supporter of abortion and same-sex marriage and so on. So if you're a Catholic now in Massachusetts or anywhere in New England, which was the Catholic heartland, Massachusetts had about a 59% Catholic majority. Rhode Island had about a 67% Catholic majority, and Connecticut had a slight Catholic majority. Now it's all changed. The demographics have changed. And if you're a Catholic in New England, you're really kind of a political exile because both political parties have kind of embraced America's cultural revolution. So I ended up working for Jim Craven for I think 4 years for the legislature, and I ended up working for a conservative think tank, the Foundation for Economic Research, and then I ended up going to work for a Catholic organization, the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights, which is a national organization today based in Manhattan. And we had a chapter here in Massachusetts of the Catholic League going back to 1979. And in 1987, the Boston City Council had a proposal to distribute condoms in Boston public schools and to do so without parental consent. And nobody from the chapter could testify, so they knew me, I guess, from my work in the legislature, and they asked me to go and testify against it. And that was March of 1987, and that basically began the whole, trajectory that I'm on today. And I ended up becoming a volunteer with them. I ended up becoming the executive director and the research director of that chapter. And then in 1995, we became independent as the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts.
Wow, incredible. C.J. Doyle is with us. He is executive director of the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts, CatholicActionLeague.org. C.J., what did you study at Boston College?
I was a double major in history and political science. I loved history from grammar school and from high school, and I had enough history credits by the beginning of my junior year that I could take a second major. So I took political science as a second major. And the history department was famous or notorious, I should say, at BC because among so many universities, you think of Harvard, MIT, Tufts, and so on, BC, the Catholic Jesuit University, had what was reputed to be the most Marxist history department of any university in Boston.
Yeah, you've seen a lot. It's interesting, the timeline of your life, how it overlaps so much that has changed, so much that has been tumultuous in our nation and especially there in Boston. I mean, I guess just any thoughts? We've got a couple minutes before the break. Anything just kind of looking over it, noticing all the change and the just the upheaval that you've seen throughout your life from the time you were a kid till now. What do you make of it? What's your main takeaway?
I think a lot of it was generational, and I think if you see a very clear distinction, at least in Massachusetts politics, New England politics, between pre-conciliar and post-conciliar Catholics. And in many cases, we have legislators today that are the nieces, nephews, sons, and daughters of very strong pro-life Catholic legislators, again, of the World War II generation, who were formed, in the pre-conciliar church, and now their very sons, their very children, their very, again, nephews and nieces are radically pro-abortion, pro-homosexual, pro-same-sex marriage, pro-birth control, and so on. So we saw a real generational shift in the church between those who were formed in the pre-conciliar church and those that were formed in the post-conciliar church. And I think there was a failure to impart the faith. Cardinal Law used to say that most Catholics today are catechetically illiterate, and I think that was a fair statement. And you just had a whole generation that grew up without any kind of firm foundation in the Catholic faith. And I think this has cost us enormously, not only in a spiritual sense, but in society.
Yeah. Wealth of information and insight. CJ Doyle is going to be back with us. He's with us the entire hour. Thanks be to God, sharing some of his personal testimony. We'll get into the good work of the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts. See what stories CJ might want to tell from all that he's done and been a part of over the years, and the good work there. But also, we'll open up the phone lines as well. If you want to call in any questions that you'd like to present today, a lot of knowledge of the history of what's taken place over the previous decades, especially in Boston. 1-877-511-5483. We'll be right back.
iCatholic Mobile is a 5G wireless provider dedicated to supporting your faith and values, offering unlimited talk and text, reliable data, and plans that support Catholic causes. A portion of every dollar helps sustain the mission of the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. With nationwide coverage, iCatholic Mobile connects you to what matters most. More information is available at iCatholicMobile.com.
iCatholic Mobile underwrites for the Station of the Cross.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, CJ Doyle, on this Testimony Tuesday, sharing some of his personal story. He's the executive director of the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts, founded in 1995. You can find him at catholicactionleague.org. So, founded in 1995. CJ, tell us a bit about those early days with the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts. What do you remember?
Well, we were founded as an anti-defamation organization and as a religious freedom rights organization. And given the fact that, Massachusetts was kind of the epicenter of so many assaults on Christian civilization, we had plenty of work to do. Massachusetts had and still has one of the most rigid exclusionary anti-aid amendments of any state constitution. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court has spoken to that, and there could conceivably be some progress there. But the legislature now is entirely, to the political left. An actual majority of legislators in both branches, the House and the Senate, are listed as either champions or allies of Planned Parenthood. We also, Massachusetts also pushed the abortion agenda very early on. We actually had a very strong pro-life bill that went through back in 1978, and that was something called the Doyle-Flynn Amendment, named after State Representative Charles Doyle, no relation to me, and State Representative Raymond Flynn, who became mayor of Boston, later U.S. ambassador to the Vatican, which prohibited the public funding of abortion in Massachusetts. And the fellow who actually authored it as a budget amendment was my boss, State Representative Jim Craven, who was considered something of a parliamentary expert, an expert on the budget. So Charlie Doyle went to him for help there. And that got struck down, or at least partially struck down in the courts in a decision of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court called Moe versus Hanley, which asserted a constitutional right to publicly funded abortion in Massachusetts. Now, the Massachusetts Constitution was written in 1780 by John Adams, Sam Adams, and James Bowdoin. So how a court can decide that a constitution written in 1780 had an implicit right to, an explicit right to publicly funded abortion remains something of a mystery. And of course, also Massachusetts was kind of the center of the homosexual agenda. This is the gay marriage decision came down Goodrich in 2003, and before that, it was the center of a lot of homosexual militancy where we had hate crimes committed against Catholic churches. The infamous 1990, ACT UP incident at Holy Cross Cathedral, where obscenities were shouted at worshipers and where condoms were actually thrown at priests and their families, young newly ordained priests, and they tried to actually physically enter the cathedral and disrupt ordinations. So we were involved in a lot of things. We called for hate crime investigations for all of these things and for constitutional rights investigations. The Massachusetts political class was not responsive in that regard. And one of the people who didn't respond to us, by the way, was a fellow named Newman Flanagan, who was the district attorney of Suffolk County, who went on to become the supreme treasurer of the Knights of Columbus. So again, it's an example of how thoroughly kind of corrupt and debased the whole Massachusetts political class had become. We were involved in a lot of things. We ended up stopping an anti-Catholic, anti-Irish program called Father Ted from a BBC program from being shown on WGBH TV in Boston, which was the flagship station of the public broadcasting network. We stopped a kind of anti-Catholic pro-homosexual questionnaire from being circulated to students in the town of Watertown. We had a major legislative victory. We had Governor William Weld, who was a liberal Republican, cited us as one of 3 organizations responsible for the passage of something called the Religious Freedom in the Workplace Law, which guaranteed the right of Catholics and other religious believers to celebrate their religious holidays, religious holy days, without being without being threatened with firing by their employers. It went back to the case of of 2 Catholic women named Reed and Pilecki who were fired by the Taunton Dog Track, who was, by the way, the owner was a fellow named George Carney, who was a major contributor to Catholic Charities, and he got someone senior to come in from Catholic Charities and testify in court that Catholics were indeed obligated to work on Christmas and on other days if that was part of their conditions of their employment. Now, he violated the very rules of his licensing by doing that, and we did something that made us very unpleasant with the legislature. We exposed the fact that more than a half dozen legislators who were trying to put the kibosh on this law were recipients of campaign contributions from the track owner George Carney. Anyways, that broke the logjam, and the bill went through, and it was passed by both branches, and it was signed into law by Governor Weld. We were also involved. We were the plaintiffs in a famous court case called Connors versus the City of Boston, where we partnered with the American Center for Law and Justice, and that struck down all domestic partner ordinances in Massachusetts. They couldn't pass domestic partners in the legislature, so the city of Boston and various other kind of liberal cities like Northampton and Cambridge and in other places put through domestic partner ordinances, which provided certain tax-funded benefits to the unmarried partners of municipal employees, and we actually. We got the Supreme Judicial Court to strike that down. And the Supreme Judicial Court Justice, which struck it down, was a woman named Margaret Marshall, who said it violated state insurance law. And of course, Margaret Marshall became infamous a few years later because she was the one that authored the Goodridge decision, which legalized same-sex marriage in Massachusetts. So you could say we won the battle, but perhaps in the long run lost the war. But we did stop for about 5 years or so this domestic partners until Goodridge came down. We were also one of the plaintiffs in the case to force the legislature to take a vote on the constitutional amendment, protection of marriage amendment, and we were involved in every conceivable public issue. We supported former Massachusetts Senate President William Bulger in his efforts to repeal the anti-aid amendment, and again, we also responded to any kind of attacks by the media on the Catholic Church, and we had quite a lot of Catholic bashers in Boston. The infamous excommunicated ex-priest James Carroll was a columnist for the Boston Globe, and he wrote something like 54 columns over the course of about 8 years, attacking the Catholic faith and maligning it and lying about it in many cases. And we pointed out that, many of the things he said were lies. We got some letters to the editor published. Marjorie Egan, again, a left-wing, culturally conforming Catholic, a real bigot, by the way. She wrote about Pope Benedict saying he should resign and give himself up for prosecution. The Boston Herald in those days were very good about publishing our letters in response to that. And we also have a fellow named Kevin Cullen in the Globe, another chronic Catholic basher. We had some in some of the local papers like the Worcester Telegram and so on. So we spent a lot of time responding to these attacks on the church and the media. And we probably had, not to boast, but we had probably the highest public profile of any kind of, pro-life conservative or Catholic group in the Commonwealth.
Wow, incredible. CJ Doyle is with us again. The website is CatholicActionLeague.org, the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts. Just amazing as you just give even that brief rundown, and there's so much more that you've been involved in. But as you're rattling it all off, I just can't help but think, number one, that it's kind of, again, this sort of perfect storm that has taken place in Boston, a very evil perfect storm where you've got you're talking about this the propaganda, anti-Catholic propaganda from the media. You're talking about this very left moving political scene, and then you've got the church that a whole lot of human corruption in the human element of the church, and then you got some really great, strong, solid Catholics who hold the line and are fighting the good fight in Massachusetts and in Boston, like yourself. What is it like as you've been doing this now for decades, since 1995 with the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts, but even before that, what is it like to continue to fight that good fight when it seems like maybe there's not a whole lot of people with you, but you keep pushing anyway, and you're leading the charge, and we're very grateful that you are. But what's the experience of that like? Do you ever feel like it's a lost cause, and you gotta ask the Lord to give you the strength to keep going? I imagine it must be very difficult sometimes.
Well, we do ask the Lord to give us the strength, but I'm Irish. Our people fought the English for 800 years before becoming independent, so we take kind of a long view of things. But it's also a case where this is not unknown, kind of historically. I mean, if you're a Catholic in New England now, it's kind of like being a Catholic in Third Republic France or PRI Mexico or the Savoyard Italy, where a majority of the political class are baptized Catholics, and almost every one of them, to a man and to a woman, are functionally apostates, are again culturally conforming liberals who have essentially become anti-clerical and anti-Catholic. So it's not as though this is unique to Massachusetts. It's very sad that you had in Boston a real strong Catholic culture. Probably the highest ranking American elected official that was loyal to the Catholic faith was the congressman from South Boston, John W. McCormick, who was Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives from 1962 to 1971. And he was such a strong Catholic that he was attacked for being pro-life in the 1950s. And he opposed Margaret Sanger going back to the 1930s. And when President Kennedy, was running for president and gave that infamous Houston speech where he talked about, he would do nothing to restrict abortion or birth control or have diplomatic relations with the Vatican, was opposed to aid to parochial schools. John McCormick, who was then House Majority Leader, was strongly saying that any federal aid to education should include Catholic private and parochial schools. So we had some really strong Catholic leaders. We had a great mayor and governor, James Michael Curley, who was mayor 4 times and was governor once, was elected, 4 times to Congress. And he was a real kind of a Catholic populist and, again, a very, very, pious, devout Catholic. And you had Louise Day Hicks, who was the congresswoman and who was a president of the school committee and president of the city council, chairman of the school committee. And she defended the Catholic neighborhoods. And again, I mentioned before about Governor Edward J. King, again, a marvelously strong pro-life governor, daily communicant. He had been executive director of the Port Authority and then ran for governor. And he was savaged terribly by the media. But so we produced, and again, even on the legislative level, State Representative Jim Craven, I work for, Ambassador Flynn, State Representative Charles Doyle, State Representative Michael Paul Feeney, a great district attorney, Garrett Byrne, who prosecuted Kenneth Edelin, who was the abortionist who strangled that unfortunate baby on the table after a botched abortion. So you had wonderfully Catholic men and a great, and Catholic women, a great Catholic culture. And it's very sad, obviously, to see that completely, what is it, corruptio optimi, the corruption of the best is the worst, and to see that all lost. But we have to keep on, struggling, and we discharge our duties, and we act according to our conscience and leave the rest to Almighty God.
Yeah, praise God. Yeah, great to hear that. Very inspiring. CJ Doyle with us, CatholicActionLeague.org. If it's not a place that you're going to especially if you're in Massachusetts, that is a website you need to know and frequent that website. Get the information that CJ Doyle is putting out there, Executive Director of the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts. Again, CatholicActionLeague.org. If you want to get a question in for CJ, again, you can tell he is a man that he's got the history and he's got the insight, and he's a lifelong resident of Boston, Massachusetts, continues to be a very influential voice in discussions concerning the Catholic faith and public policy and all that's going on there. A watchdog who's willing to get involved as well. Very blessed to have him part of the Men's March, National Men's March to Abolish Abortion Rally for Personhood. He came out and spoke at the rally last year in Boston. Very grateful for that. But he's up to great work. If you want to call in with a question for CJ today, 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. We'll be right back. Back to the Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, CJ Doyle, CatholicActionLeague.org. CJ, anything else you want to share with us in terms of personal testimony or the good work of the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts leading us up to present day?
Well, the League is involved in two things that our attitude is, if no one else does it, we should do it. And we're involved in two things that really no one else is kind of keeping track of. And the first thing actually gets us in the media quite a bit is that we keep track of all the issues of vandalism and arson attacks and graffiti and defacement of Catholic churches and institutions. And it's been actually worse than it's been reported nationally. We have on our website a list, I think going back to 2010, of all the known attacks on Catholic churches here in Massachusetts, the various acts of arson, acts again of graffiti, acts of the smashing of statues, trashing of school buildings. Cemeteries have been attacked, headstones knocked over, churches have been attacked, Catholic schools have been attacked, various Catholic buildings on parish campuses have been attacked, and we're the only group in Massachusetts who keeps track of it. And we have a bit of a hard time keeping track of it because, for reasons which are unfathomable to me, the Archdiocese of Boston does not keep track of it themselves, and seems to discourage members of the clergy from reporting to the police about this. And I actually spoke at one point to an assistant attorney general of Massachusetts about prosecuting someone who had attacked a Catholic church in Dorchester, and they said the Archdiocese asked us not to prosecute him. Their attitude has always been, well, it's a poor soul and they're emotionally troubled, and we shouldn't be punitive towards them. Now, other groups, I think of the Jewish community, does not take that attitude and thinks that people who commit hate crimes against them should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and good for them. But for some reason, this seems to be that there's no reporting mechanism or accounting mechanism, so we kind of have to hear about it either because it got on the media or you hear about it incidentally because some priest or some parishioner called us up and told us that. But we get in the media, a fair amount on that issue. The media has become more liberal as time has gone on, more secularist. So the kind of talking about pro-life issues or talking about the homosexual agenda is now where it was an active issue, say in the 1990s, early 2000s. Now the media really treats anyone now who takes a dissenting view, that is to say, who supports Christian morality, as kind of an extremist. But we do get in the media a lot on these church vandalism. The other issue that we're involved in is we keep track of violations of Catholics in political life. In 2003, the National U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops issued a document called Catholics in Political Life, and that's on our website. You also go onto the U.S. CCB website. And that prohibits Catholic institutions from providing, quote unquote, awards, honors, or platforms to those who dissent or reject our fundamental moral teachings. And unfortunately, most Catholic institutions in Massachusetts are in kind of an advanced state of apostasy on this issue. It's quite normative now, not only for Catholic colleges and Catholic universities, but for elite Catholic secondary schools and Catholic charities, which are actual archdiocesan organizations, and in some cases Catholic parishes, which are archdiocesan or diocesan organizations, to give awards to these pro-abortion and pro-homosexual public public figures. Just in this latest round here in, May is the month of Our Lady, and in Massachusetts, it's the month where Catholic institutions advertise their rejection of the right to life and Catholic morality. We had Emmanuel College, which is run by I think the Sisters of Notre Dame, and they gave an award to District Attorney, Middlesex County District Attorney Marian Ryan, who was not only a fanatic for abortion, but actually was a group of prosecutors. It was a signatory to a statement by a group of prosecutors years ago saying that if Roe versus Wade was overturned, they would never prosecute anyone or prosecute any abortionist or anyone for procuring an abortion. So again, a radical extremist. Boston College Law School just gave an award, or had their commencement speaker, U.S. Senator Bob Casey Jr. of Pennsylvania. Now, his father, remember, Governor Bob Casey Sr. was a great pro-life man, but Casey Jr. has completely, repudiated all of his father's positions. And this is the second commencement address he's given at Boston College. He gave it to BC Law this year. About 8 years ago, he was the commencement speaker at Boston College itself. And we had another Doris Kearns Goodwin, who was a great critic of the Dobbs decision, a supporter of Roe versus Wade, received the award from BC this year. And Holy Cross invited former U.S. Senator, former presidential candidate, and former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry to give a speech. Now, you might remember Kerry not only has basically apostatized on every Catholic moral issue, but actually, personally attacked two popes, Pope St. John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI. And remember, he denounced Pope St. John Paul II for crossing the line, violating the separation of church and state, because the Pope called for Catholic political leaders in America to oppose, the deformity of marriage. So here is, a Catholic Jesuit college, Holy Cross, giving an award not only to somebody who is functionally an apostate, but somebody that personally attacked a canonized saint. So this is, and the Archdiocese of Boston, the Father Brian Hare, who was kind of the eminence grise under Cardinal O'Malley. He was the reputed author for Cardinal Bernardine of the so-called seamless garment. He had a social justice conference where he invited Boston Mayor Michelle Wu. Now, Mayor Wu is somebody that was endorsed by Planned Parenthood and actually issued a statement welcoming their endorsement. And again, is somebody who completely rejects, Catholic moral teachings, Catholic sexual ethics. So, the church, unfortunately, is kind of institutionally corrupt. You have, Catholic organizations seem more inclined to seek the approval of the pro-abortion governing class and the culturally conforming major donor class than they are in promoting the right to life and promoting traditional morality and defending the rights of ordinary Catholics. So we keep track of all of these violations of Catholics in political life. And if you want to find out what Catholic institutions in Massachusetts are doing, just go to our website and just read our news releases and chronologically. And it's a great scandal. All these Catholic institutions, which were founded by Catholics and founded for Catholics and founded by faithful Catholics, have essentially again conformed to the dominant secular culture. They've abandoned the charisma of their founders, and they've embraced the ideology of so-called reproductive rights, the right to kill unborn children, the deformity of marriage, contraception, this transgender delusion, I'm an alumnus of Boston College. My high school Catholic memorial a couple of years ago, we had a demonstration, about 80 people out in front, because they gave an award to former Boston mayor and U.S. Labor Secretary Marty Walsh. And Walsh was again a baptized Catholic who said that if Roe versus Wade was overturned, he would make Boston a sanctuary city for abortion. And he actually renamed a square in Boston South End, Worcester Square, Kenneth Edelin Square, naming a square about in honor of a notorious abortionist, the abortionist Kenneth Edelin, who was nicknamed the Boston Strangler. Again, I mentioned earlier in the program about how he had killed the child, strangled the child in a botched abortion. And he actually, according to reports, he actually strangled the child using the umbilical cord. So this is really gruesome, Nazi-like figure. And he was actually prosecuted by a great Catholic District Attorney, Garrett Byrne. He was convicted, and a higher court overturned the conviction. And now, a nominally Catholic mayor of Boston, named the square after him. By the way, the Missionary Society of St. James the Apostle, whose president at the time was Cardinal Sean O'Malley, who was at the time the chairman of the Pro-Life Activities Committee of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. They gave Walsh an award. They named him the Humanitarian of the Year, again, the fanatical abortion supporter. And, we have here in Boston, now retired former U.S. ambassador to the Holy See, former pro-life mayor of Boston, Raymond Flynn. And he never got an award from the Archdiocese from Catholic Charities. But the late Mayor Thomas Menino, who again was who was pro-abortion and in favor of the deformity of marriage, he got 2 awards from Catholic Charities. And we had another great Catholic mayor, John Collins, who's dead now, and he spent most of his post-mayoral career in pro-life advocacy. In fact, he got fired from a television program here in Boston, a panel show called 5 on 5, because he kept talking about, how our culture has devalued human life, and the principal cause of that is legal abortion. And he never got an award. But we have we give awards, Catholic institutions, Catholic charities, Missionary Society of St. James the Apostle, all of our colleges and universities and secondary schools give awards to these pro-abortion politicians. And it's a great scandal. We had 2 Catholics here, by the way, in Boston. One is dead now, John J. Wacko Hurley of the South Boston Allied War Veterans, and the other is still alive, Eleanor McCullen of Operation Rescue, who won 2 Supreme Court cases affirming religious freedom rights. Wacko Hurley won the Hurley versus Glib, which asserted the right of the Boston St. Patrick's Day Parade organizers to conduct the St. Patrick's Day Parade in a manner consistent with the Catholic religion and keeping out militant homosexual groups. And of course, Eleanor McCullen won, McCoakley versus Cullen before the U.S. Supreme Court, which undid Massachusetts' restrictive anti-First Amendment buffer zone legislation. So we have 2 Catholics here that won landmark religious freedom cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, and they've never gotten an award from any Catholic or a platform or a speech or anything from any Catholic institution. So this is an example again of how far our Catholic institutions have really kind of conformed to the dominant culture. Somebody made a point about the English Reformation in the 16th century. It wasn't enthusiasm for the kind of the neo-Calvinist theology of some of these Protestant militants. It was the fact that so many Catholics simply conformed to royal authority and apostatized rather than lose their positions. And I think we're seeing a lot of that today in both church and state, not only in the political class, but in the Catholic in the Catholic official class and the Catholic academic class. And it's very, very sad. We don't. BC only gave 1 award, by the way, one honorary degree to a pro-life figure. That was former Republican Congressman Ray LaHood of Washington, the state of Washington. But at the time, he was Barack Obama's transportation secretary. So I guess being pro-life is acceptable to BC if you work for Barack Obama.
CJ Doyle is with us, CatholicActionLeague.org. CJ, what you lay out there are just absolutely scandalous. What is the response? What's the standard response from the Archdiocese, the leadership of the Archdiocese, to all of this, that they are allowing all of these awards through Catholic institutions to pro-aborts? What's their response, or I guess what's their excuse?
No excuse and no response. A whole group of pro-life groups, including the Catholic Action League, came together in 2018, and we formed something called the Massachusetts Pro-Life Coalition, and it was again a broad range of pro-life groups, and Operation Rescue and Mass Resistance and so on, representatives, people from the Pro-Life Legal Defense Fund, and we put out a statement called "Stop the Betrayals," because there's a culture of betrayal in the church in Boston, where we can't get secular society to uphold the right to life and uphold Catholic moral principles if they're not first vindicated in our own institutions. And it was completely, got some attention in the conservative and conservative Catholic press, was ignored by the mainstream media and was completely ignored by the Archdiocese of Boston. The constituency of the Archdiocese, and by the way, we have one good bishop here in Massachusetts, Bishop McManus in Worcester, who has took a lot of heat for coming out a couple of years ago and putting out a document asserting that Catholic schools will retain their Catholic identity in the face of this kind of transgender movement. But in the Archdiocese and in the other dioceses, again, it's just their constituencies seem to be the pro-abortion political class, the media, and the larger culture. Pro-life Catholics are not something that really interests them.
Yeah, good people need to stand up and push back. Evil triumphs when good people do nothing. It's great to hear about the work that CJ Doyle is doing with the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts. You can learn more at catholicactionleague.org. One more segment to come here with CJ. If you do want to get a call in, any question, 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. And join us at the next National Men's March to Abolish Abortion Rally for Personhood, D.C. this weekend, themensmarch.com, but also in Boston coming up November 1st, Saturday, November 1st. We'll be back in Boston. It's time to stand up stronger than ever, especially after hearing all of this. Who's going to stand up for the least of these in the midst of all of this? Themensmarch.com. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with CJ Doyle, Executive Director of the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts, catholicactionleague.org. Final segment. CJ, what else would you like to share with us today?
Well, I think just to follow up on a couple of the other things that we mentioned, the church has to be very careful to avoid compromising itself with this, again, pro-abortion political class. The governor of Massachusetts is a woman named Maura Healey. She's a partnered lesbian, and somebody who was vowed to shut down every pro-life pregnancy center here in Massachusetts. She actually got the legislature to appropriate $1 million for a propaganda campaign that's on the side of buses and transit vehicles, and is on radio programs denouncing pro-life pregnancy centers. And she's constantly being rewarded and honored and given platforms by the Catholic Church. She went and visited St. John's Prep, elite prep school. She's there's a picture of her and Cardinal O'Malley embracing at a Catholic Charities dinner. She was invited to speak at the Catholic Schools Foundation dinner, and she was brought over to Rome for that climate conference they had, along with Mayor Wu. And we did a little research on this, and we discovered, lo and behold, that Governor Healey gave $1 million to Catholic Charities as an unprecedentedly large grant, and then came up with another grant of about $10 million, which were divided between 8 organizations for migrant resettlement and training here in Massachusetts. And 2 of the 8 organizations, one was Catholic Charities of Springfield, and the other was Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Boston. So she's given probably, $2.5–3 million, $3.5 million altogether to the Catholic Church. So this is something that Catholics should be aware of. So when we see somebody who is a complete enemy of not only somebody who's for abortion and who's for the deformity of marriage, but is actively persecuting pro-lifers, and is as Attorney General did nothing when pro-life pregnancy centers were firebombed in Worcester, and actually ended up denouncing the victims of the crime rather than denouncing the perpetrators. And somebody, again, who isn't just ideologically pro-abortion, but is actually trying to destroy the First Amendment rights of the pro-life movement. That person is being greeted and honored and feted and welcomed by Catholic institutions. And you have to ask yourself, is this because she gives the Catholic Church so much money? Again, it's appalling. If you look at the financial statements of the Archdiocese, one of the ways they balance their budget is by liquidating property. And some of these development deals require the approval of what used to be called the BRA in Boston, the Boston Redevelopment Authority. It's now, I think, called the Boston Planning and Development Authority. But that means the mayor. So if you want, they took a parking lot for the cathedral, Holy Cross Cathedral in Boston South End, and turned it into a huge, condo development, apartment development. And they made millions of dollars on that. And in order to get approval for that, you need the approval of the mayor of Boston. So if you look at, legislators voting money for Catholic Charities, if you look at the governor giving grants of money to Catholic Charities, if you look at the mayor of Boston approving real estate sales that keep the Archdiocese solvent, it isn't too hard to figure out why there's so much corruption in the higher levels of the Catholic Church here. We have to really ask ourselves: is the leadership of the Church being compromised by vested financial interest here, by the financial interest of receiving money for Catholic Charities and getting approval for the real estate deals, again, which keep the Archdiocese solvent. So I think, one of the things the point we try to make to the pro-life movement is, if we're going to be successful in society, we really have to reform the Church. And we have to address these issues of so much apostasy and betrayal, and this kind of corporate culture of betrayal, where the pro-life movement is simply betrayed at every opportunity, and they embrace the pro-abortion political class. And even when they do something pro-life, it tends to be, the statement tends to be kind of tepid and apologetic, and they hasten to add that they're with the political left on so many other issues like immigration and capital punishment and so on. So I think this is the scandal of the church today is very much like the scandal of the church in the pre-Reformation church, the 16th century church. It's the scandal of clerical living and of immorality and of being compromised by their relationship with the state. And the state really in the 16th century ran in England, in Scotland, Ireland, in France, and so many other countries. It was really the state which ran the Catholic Church more so than the Pope. So we really have to, I think, address some of the same issues that we saw that the Counter-Reformation Church addressed 500 years ago by separating the church from corrupt political influences, and of course also, separating out of the clergy those who are actively engaged in immorality and predation.
Has there been any signs of change in a good way under the new Archbishop Henning? Have there been any big moves that lead you to believe anything's being cleaned up or changed for the better?
Sadly, no. We had a lot of hopes for Archbishop Henning. He was briefly, I think, less than a year, the Bishop of Providence, Rhode Island, and pro-life Catholics and traditional Catholics who went to the Latin Mass said that he didn't, do anything to harm them. He left them alone for the most part. And in the case of there's a new wonderful, Catholic secondary school at Chesterton Academy, a Lady of Hope in Warwick, Rhode Island. He supported that. And they had a great pro-life group, the Mother of Life Center, which actually had kind of a bad relationship with the Diocese of Providence. Apparently it improved under Bishop Henning, and again, he didn't enforce Traditionis Custodes against the Latin Mass communities in Providence. So we were kind of hopeful, but nothing has really happened. Nothing has changed, since he's become Archbishop here last October. Again, they welcomed Boston Mayor Michelle Wu to this Archdiocesan Social Justice Conference. A pastor of the Archdiocese of Boston, St. Cecilia's, Father John Ooney, gave the invocation at Governor Healy's State of the State address. Governor Healy was welcomed to Cathedral High School, which is which is now it's under an independent. It's still officially a Catholic group, but it's under an independent lay board. But that's across the street from the cathedral, and they actually put out a great statement welcoming Governor Healy, who again was this partnered lesbian who's trying to shut down the pro-life movement. So what's going on at Cathedral High School? Sadly, they say Bishop Henning is going to listen for a year and learn for a year and not take action for a year. But right now, it's just a continuation. And I don't say this, we have hope for him. But it gives me no pleasure to say this, but right now it looks like just a continuation of the regime that we had under Cardinal Sean O'Malley.
Yeah, well, we'll be paying attention as he moves into, I guess, the 1 year mark. I think it says he was appointed by Pope Francis August of last year, installed on October, on Halloween, it looks like, All Hallows Eve, October 31st, 2024. So we'll see as we get closer to a year. But the biggest thing I'd be looking for is some staff changes at the Archdiocese. I think there are some changes to be made there that would signal a move in the right direction if the Archbishop is going to do so. And it's a difficult position to be in, to come in there and try to figure out who's who and who's telling you the truth and who's on the mark, who's off the mark, and very, very difficult. So we pray for Archbishop Henning and for everything surrounding that situation there in the Archdiocese of Boston. Anything else you want to share with us, CJ?
Well, just one thing about Archbishop Henning. A priest told me that he brought his own secretary from Providence, and that's a good sign. So he won't be dependent so much on the archdiocesan bureaucracy here. So again, we're hopeful, but we don't want to, be unrealistic either. But no, I want to thank you for having me, Jim. And again, if anybody who's interested in our work, it's www.catholicactionleague.org. CatholicActionLeague.org, and you can check out our website, and it tells all of our work, going back for the last 20 years or so. But we have plenty of work to do here in Massachusetts. The pro-life movement has plenty of challenges, and the Catholic community has plenty of challenges. So we rely on our Lord and on Our Lady, and on the goodwill of Catholics. And we're delighted that you have a Catholic media apostolate. St. Pius X, a great pope, said he would sell the fisherman's ring for the sake of starting a Catholic newspaper. So it's very, very important, Jim, what you are doing.
Oh, hey, we got to work together, and look forward to having you back and keeping people updated on what's going on in Massachusetts and how they can get involved as well. CatholicActionLeague.org. Thank you so much, CJ Doyle. God bless you all.